I'm gonna be honest with you, I am equally as hyped as I am concerned about what we can expect from this game, and today we are going to talk about Chrono Odyssey. A few days ago, the official channel of Chrono Odyssey uploaded a developer interview sharing some deep information about the game, details about gameplay mechanics, modes, and everything else. And I know I'm kind of late to the party, but if you missed the interview, I'm going to summarize everything today. So I'm going to talk about everything that I found out about the game, give my honest opinion on these things, and also share my concerns. And I'm also going to share some things that the video might have shown but that were not mentioned, trying to provide a very deep dive into everything we know. But before we jump in, a quick note: even though I might share some concerns and I might say some negative things in this video, I still think that this has the potential to be one of the best upcoming MMORPGs, and I'm pretty hyped about it, to be honest. But it seems to receive some universal hype from all the YouTubers out there, and instead of overhyping it, I wanted to stay rational and talk about the good things but also the concerns that still stand in the room. And if you like these types of videos with honest opinions, consider leaving a like and also subscribing to the channel, because it will help me grow the channel and provide more content to you. One quick note that I wanted to make, since this is just my second video on this channel: this is not going to be an MMORPG focused channel, so I'm basically talking about all the games that I like or that I dislike, so please don't be confused if I talk about different genres of games in my videos. Let's jump in. Chrono Odyssey was first announced in 2020, and they already mentioned that the game is going to be launched on PC, PS5 and Xbox Series X and S, which means that the game is going to be an MMORPG that features cross-platform gameplay, which is honestly a pretty cool thing. I honestly think that, especially for an MMO, this is very important to keep the player base as high as possible. For the release date, they aim to launch the game in the fourth quarter of 2025, and you can actually already play it next month. The reason is that they are going to have a closed beta test, which will run in June, and you can already sign up on their Steam page. So if you're interested, you should absolutely do this right now, because I think the earlier you sign up, the higher the chances that you can actually get in. So they have shared some pretty neat trailers in the past years that show some great graphics in a dark fantasy setting, and also some very action-oriented gameplay paired with some very good animations, some very cool looking enemies, and some very neat skills. These trailers looked absolutely clean. They even look kind of too good. So I understand that some of the comments already said that these are just rendered scenes and probably not reflecting the gameplay of the game, and that made me skeptical as well. The game features an action combat system with the typical things like aiming, dodging, parry mechanics, which means that, again, in this game, skill does matter more than your stats. The trailer also showed some different classes, and they also showed huge field bosses, which made an impression that this game is going to be an MMO with large group sizes. However, I can already tell you this is not the case, because they are actually focusing on small group sizes, but I'm going to talk about this later. And it seems that they had like a change of course. But that's basically what we knew about the game. They didn't really share too much about it, besides the trailers, which looked absolutely great, but also kind of too great, so people were skeptical. So let's deep dive into everything that they have showed and said in the interview. With Chrono Odyssey, they aim to make progression as enjoyable as the endgame. So they pretty much don't want you to rush to the endgame just to experience all the endgame content, because in most of the games, the progression until endgame is kind of streamlined and kind of lame. Instead, they laid a huge focus on the progression part of the game. And I think that's kind of a great idea, but they also have to keep in mind that the endgame is what keeps the players. So the endgame is probably the factor that influences the overall long-term success of the game the most. But let's talk about the classes in the game. So my last information was that you could basically use 2 weapons of choice. Well, this is not really the case. The good news is that this game doesn't feature a classic class system. You do have different classes, but they have 3 different weapons that you can choose from, basically using 2 of these weapons, swapping between them mid-fight. And these weapons should provide different playstyles, and they call it hybrid classes. So basically their goal was to support flexible gameplay and varied playstyles. And they wanted to allow their players to basically be able to play solo, but also have an important role in group play. So as an example, the swordsman seems to be able to swap between a two-handed weapon, and a sword and shield. And basically every time you want to dish out damage, you swap to the two-handed weapon, and every time the boss is going to attack you, you should swap the weapon to be able to block the damage with your shield. They even say that these weapon swaps are important for the gameplay, and they encourage players to actually use this function of the game because the skills do not have a global cooldown, so every weapon has independent cooldowns, and they basically introduce an early elite boss to force players to actually learn this mechanic. So they kind of just say, get good, and I'm fine with that. Adding to this, they mentioned that healers and tanks can progress the game independently. So there seems to be a role system in the game because they mention healers and tanks. However, it is unclear how important these roles are for group play. So the next thing that they talked about is the question, is Chrono Odyssey focusing on large-scale group gameplay or small-scale groups? And they pretty much said that they are focusing on small groups. It seems that you can do everything in the game with a small group of friends, slowly ramping up the group size until you reach the maximum group size of 5 player groups on max level. So that means no raids with a large player group. Some of you might be disappointed about that. I don't really care. I'm fine playing most of the content with a max group of 5 people. That's okay for me, but it might take away from the MMO feeling for some people. And I'm also kind of wondering what's with the field bosses, because in the first trailer you could see like a huge field boss and many players fighting these huge bosses, and the question is, are they still in or did they just take it out? But I assume they are still in, it's just not the focus of the game. They also mentioned that you can play the whole game solo. But I'm honestly asking myself if that is really the case. Because, well, let me just quickly list all the game modes that they mentioned. So, of course, you have the normal open world exploration. It seems that you have labyrinths. It's a pretty hard English word, actually. And field bosses. They also mentioned chrono gates and trials, which are kind of randomized mechanics, like a roguelike mode, which I actually really enjoy. I love roguelike modes. Modes that you have to play solo. They also mentioned expeditions, which seem to be playable for a group of 3 players. And region bosses, which are available for a party of 5 people. And on top of that, they mentioned time portals and bounty hunting, which is not PvP bounty hunting, it's PvE bounty hunting. But they clearly mentioned the group sizes for these modes, and that makes me think, are all these modes actually playable solo? Or do you have to form a group to do certain content? Because I can't really imagine doing a region boss by myself. So we're probably going to see how this goes. It's hard to tell. They also mentioned that you are able to cut down trees in the game, do fishing. We've also seen mining in the game. So pretty much life skilling is in the game, and crafting as well. And they actually also showed the crafting, which is basically pretty close to the crafting in New World. I might be mistaken, but it looks very similar. And one thing they mentioned is that you can play the game by focusing on combat, but you could also focus on crafting, because they said everything that you do in the game does offer you XP to basically level up. And I remember that from New World, and this is kind of a good idea. But also in New World, crafting was very important, and I didn't like it. I absolutely hated the crafting part, the collecting part of New World, like especially leveling up the collection process, because basically had to cut down thousands of trees to be able to cut down the next tier of trees, which was just absolutely annoying. But well, they said that you can play the game your way, and it seems that you can focus on one thing and neglect the other things. So I really hope I can kind of ignore the crafting part. Some of you might love it, I just don't. But if they nail that and I can actually just focus on the combat and another player can focus on crafting and we kind of have the same progression, that would be absolutely amazing, to be honest. That would be very cool. Speaking of playing your way, they actually mentioned that they wanted to go away from the idea of a classic main story questline. So they said, quote, they wanted to offer players the joy of discovery on their own terms by using time manipulation. It seems that in-game guidance is minimized and you should basically discover everything yourself. And this is a thing that I deem kind of good, because I'm sick of all the games that just let you auto path, and especially the games where you do absolutely not have any control over the game for the first 20 minutes and you're just forced to go there, do this. I think that absolutely sucks. So this sounds pretty good to me, actually. But one thing that kind of concerns me is that in the next sentence, the developer basically mentioned a main quest line. And later on, he also gave a tip for the beta saying that people shouldn't follow the main quest line. So I'm kind of confused about that. So it means there actually is a main quest line, but kind of feels like they are just begging me to not rush the main story and instead just enjoy the exploration of the game. So that's a bit confusing for me. We will probably see in the beta how well they implemented the main story and how well the exploration performs compared to the main quest. And a solution that I could imagine is that the main quest is just not giving too much EXP. So basically you have to do everything else to level up, but we will see, I guess. So let's see what they said about the art style and the graphics and also the lore of Chrono Odyssey. And they basically said they drew inspiration from the cosmic horror vibe of Prometheus and also from StarCraft. So for me, it looks like they combined fantasy with like sci-fi horror, and I think that looks absolutely amazing. I'm not a huge fan of sci-fi, but I think it's very well implemented and it just looks very unique. They have proven themselves with a very well-looking handcrafted world and also very unique enemy types, and I think they look absolutely amazing. But there's one thing that I'm concerned about. I think the trailers actually looked more colorful, and I pretty much like the fact that some of the areas in the game have like a higher contrast, but every gameplay scene in the interview that we saw had a very low contrast and was kind of really darkish, grayish, and with less saturation. So if everything in the game looks like this, it could kind of get boring, and it also gives me depression. I don't know. I just hope that some of the areas do have a higher contrast and higher saturation, and not everything in the game looks like dark cosmic horror. I still think it looks great. I just think that having some variety in graphic styles is probably going to be a good thing for the game. And I can already imagine how they do this. So it seems like the whole game is built around the idea of space and time, and this is reflected in every aspect of the game. So it seems that you do have skills in the fight where you can freeze time or you can teleport back in time and basically heal, just like Echo does in League of Legends, for example. But it also seems to play a role in dungeons where you basically change time to solve riddles and stuff like that. And I think one way how they might solve the whole graphical variety issue is by basically giving every timeline that you can travel to like a different kind of graphic style. Like in the past, everything was happy and the sun was shining and grass was growing. But traveling to the future, maybe after a catastrophe, the same place might look very dark and very sad. So I'm pretty interested how the time manipulation thing is going to be implemented in the game. It seems to be the main feature in the game, so we will see how this turns out, especially in multiplayer. And as you guys might know, I am a huge fan of PvP, and they also spoke about this topic and how it is implemented in Chrono Odyssey. And they said rather than sticking to conventional models like large-scale PvP and arena PvP, they wanted to focus on PvPvE kind of content. Sadly, they didn't go into too much detail, but you can actually see a scene in the video where a 3-player group actually fought a huge boss and another 3-player group at the same time. And I have to admit that I'm not happy with that. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think this kind of mode is pretty interesting, but it shouldn't be the only PvP system in the game. And I really, really hope they have other types of PvP, because if I'm fighting another player and want to test my skill against this player, I don't want a boss standing next to me and just trying to kill me as well. I just don't like this. We've seen the same idea in Throne and Liberty, basically with a larger group of players. And I think these events were just weird. I didn't like them because it wasn't structured, it wasn't organized, it was kind of just absolutely chaotic. They didn't mention anything else regarding PvP, so I really hope we do have other types of PvP in the game, because at least for me, if this is the only type of PvP in the game, they are probably going to lose me on the long term, because for me PvP is the end game, but maybe they had some other ideas, so this is just a prediction. And lastly, they also spoke about the future of the game, and they said that they wanted to focus on additional content through different timelines. And I actually think this is a great opportunity. Like, you can come up with new regions, and then you can come up with different timelines for the singular region, which just opens up so many possibilities. Like, you can even have timelines where you travel into the far future, where maybe the world doesn't even exist like it did before, or like a technology type of future. So I think the potential of content with these timelines is actually huge, which is a good sign, at least when it comes to content and world building for the future of the game. So my hopes are pretty high when it comes to that. All right, so if you watched the interview and you just focused your attention on the subtitles, here are some things that they didn't really talk about, but they could have been seen in the gameplay. So one thing that you could see in the gameplay were the customization options. While it seems that customization is pretty deep in the game, there's one thing that I wanted to mention, and that is that I do think that the body types of the characters actually depend on the classes that you have. So the Berserker using the double axes and the huge axe is probably going to be a buff character. So I would say the customization is more like Vindictus type of customization, but I might be wrong. I think I've seen a female Berserker as well, so I don't think there's actually a gender lock in the game, so if I'm not mistaken, good news on that. Another thing that seems to be present in the game is a climbing system, so you can climb over walls, you can grab onto ledges and crawl onto roofs, which is kind of a good thing for the feeling of freedom in the game, but it can also be a bad thing because they did show some gameplay elements, like some dungeons where you had to jump, where you had to crawl. That makes me kind of concerned because I think they're probably going to force you to use these systems in some gameplay segments, and this could result in more frustration than fun because you might just keep falling and failing in dungeons because the jumping or the crawling system is just not something they focused on in the game. And I kind of had to think about Expedition 33 at this moment because Expedition 33 is one of the best games I have played this year, and even they were trying to like offer some extra content with some parkour elements in the game just because basically they had some type of parkour, but it just wasn't well done. And this is like the single thing in Expedition 33 that they could have just taken out, and I wouldn't even mind a single bit. So I really hope there's not too much climbing and jumping sections in the game. What you could also see in the video are some elements of the UI. How do I say that? I don't really like the look of the UI. Like, it's not bad, but it's also not great. And I think it could look a little cooler. One thing that they also didn't talk about, but you could see it in the main menu, there seems to be a guild system in the game. I mean, it's an MMO, so you would probably expect the guild system, but especially since they mentioned they want to focus on like small group gameplay, I think having a guild system in the main menu is actually something interesting because we are probably going to see how guilds actually play out in the game. If they have some sort of role, if there's guild wars, because that's probably not what they wanted to do with the PvP system that they spoke about. If there's any kind of group content that you can do with more than 5 players, or if the guild is just helping you to find a 5-player group, we will probably see about that. But there is a guild system in the game. Another thing that you could see in the video, and no one talked about it yet, is how much active abilities you actually have. By looking at the UI, it seems that you have 4 abilities per weapon. So if you use the abilities of one weapon and you swap the weapon, the abilities of the other weapon should be available. And it seems that you have 4 additional abilities that are weapon unreliant. And besides that, there is an ability on the C button, which seems to be an alt, or it's probably going to be some type of time-based ability. And the last thing that I was able to spot that was not mentioned in the video, but you could see it, were how armors work in Chrono Odyssey. So besides providing stats, they also seem to have a weight, which might influence the gameplay. Like you can have fat rolls, for example. And it seems that they also have specific stats for PvP, bosses, monsters, meaning that you were probably going to have a PvP set and a PvE set, and a boss set maybe. That was basically everything that I was able to spot besides the things that they mentioned in the interview. So let's jump to my additional concerns. And probably the biggest concern that I have is we don't know anything about the monetization system. And maybe they don't even know how they want to monetize it. One thing that you have to keep in mind is that this is a Korean game, and many Korean games tend to be very pay to win. From the looks of it, it doesn't look pay to win, but that doesn't mean it could still turn out to be extremely pay to win. So we don't even know if it's buy to play or free to play. We also don't know if there's a stamina system or if there are cosmetics. So we have absolutely no idea what we can expect from the game in terms of monetization. And even though it could turn out to be an absolutely amazing game, it could also be completely destroyed by a bad monetization system. So we are going to see about that. Another concern that kind of bugs me is the world emptiness. Like in the interview, they mentioned a constant threat and chaos and tension everywhere in the world. And almost every section of the game that they showed looked full of monsters and pretty dark and destroyed. So I hope the world doesn't feel too empty. I hope the game has towns with NPCs, with other players that are not in the group, but you can still see them. But we will see about that. Another thing of Chrono Odyssey that kind of concerned me was the topic of group sizes for different modes. Because they said they want you to traverse the world, explore the world, and just do things on the fly. So they want you to roam the world, best case with your small group of friends, and They want you to do all the content when you stumble upon it. However, it seems that the different modes have different group sizes. So what does that mean? Let's say I'm with a group of 3 friends and we are like a group of 4 players. So it could be that we stumble upon solo content. So we have to disband the group and everyone has to do this content solo. It also could be that we stumble upon a dungeon that is made for 3 players. So one player is going to stay outside until we finish with a group of 3 players, and then basically another player has to stay outside and they are going to go in with another group of 3 players. It sounded like the modes were not really flexible in terms of the group size that you can do it with, and I hope that's not the case. Of course, if this is not the case in the normal exploration and you just queue these modes over the main menu, that's a whole different story. But if this is actually the case for dungeons that you stumble upon in the overworld, this could be a problem. Next up, another concern that I have for Chrono Odyssey is the unclarity about the relevance of the role system, because they kind of said 2 different things in this interview. Basically, they said every class can perform independently, especially healers and tanks are able to perform by themselves, and they wanted to go away from the classic role system. But in another sentence, they said that in group play, it is important that everyone plays their role correctly. So I'm kind of confused. Like, are roles important? Are they not? Well, some of you might say if you just parry everything and dodge everything, you do not need a healer, but just remember some bosses from other games where you have undodgeable mechanics and you basically receive a dot that you have to out-heal. So if this is the case and this is in the game, that means you need a healer. So the importance of the roles is unclear. But these are actually all the concerns that I have right now. But maybe you have other concerns. So if this is the case, share it in the comment section below. But also if there's anything that I might be wrong about, also please correct me in the comments below. I'm always happy about any kind of communication. But coming to a conclusion, I still have to say that Chrono Odyssey looks like one of the best upcoming MMORPGs that we are going to get in the next 1 or 2 years. But to be completely hyped about the game, we are still missing many information, especially regarding the monetization system. And the beta is still not going to answer this question. So even if you play the beta and it is really good, please keep in mind that we do not know anything about the monetization system and they could still completely mess it up. But if they don't, this is probably going to be one of my absolute favorite games in the future. Of course, I am going to play the beta and I'm going to share my experiences here. So if you want to stay up to date, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Beyond that, I also stream the games on Twitch that I like or that I want to talk about. So if you want to join me on Twitch, you can find the link in the video description. But that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video and we are going to see each other in the next video. Have a great day. Memplex out.